really good to go ahead and get moving here. We may have a few more straggling here, but we'll go. Chavez, number one, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend this. We greatly appreciate your time. We know everybody's busy, got a lot going on, so thank you very much. Hope everybody had a great holiday season, jumping off into a great new year. This is our 11th webinar here, working with the Alto team. I want to take a second to send a huge thanks out to Rodney Fisher. And, they came to our team about a year ago. They said, guys, we're seeing some gaps around our products. We're seeing areas where we're going in, and at times customers are not maximizing the products that we're putting in. And, we want to do something to try and produce some content to help really maximize the Palo Alto investments they've made. So they were gracious enough to work with us on this. They had a whole list of tracks they were looking to do. And Eric's done a great job helping us host these through. I'm really glad to help us close this series out. So thanks to Eric and Rodney for all the help you've provided throughout this. We're going to have another series starting up after this. We've been really kind of honing in on where we're getting the most attendance, where we're getting the most questions, where we're getting the most feedback from customers. And the two topics that really stood out through the series were SSL decryption and Azure. So the next, we're going to be doing a 3-part series focused on SSL decryption. That's going to start out with a head focused on doing PKI the right way. Get into, once you're doing SSL decryption, what's next? What do you need to be focused on? And we're going to end it with, handling inbound SSL decryption. So that's going to be a 3-part series that's going to be coming out. We're also going to be sending out a survey following this webinar, and we're looking for feedback from you guys. We're looking for feedback on topics that you're interested in. There will be a free t-shirt giveaway just like the last one. So if you take the time to go through the survey that we send you, you will get a free t-shirt. We really hope to get some feedback on that. Eric's going to be talking to us today about Aperture. And Aperture is just a phenomenal tool that, in all honesty, we're not seeing really leveraged as much as I would think. So he's going to talk to us about some of the benefits of Aperture, how it can help us protect our, some of our SaaS-based data and our cloud repositories. How it integrates with the firewall and some of the value around that. So, Eric, really appreciate you helping us drive this one. Thanks a lot. And everyone, I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's been great working with the EITS team here, right? On this, great engineers, and it was good to be able to do this with you. So today, right, we're going to be talking about SaaS, right, and how we approach SaaS and managing SaaS risks within an enterprise, right? And so for us, it's really kind of a 2-part solution, right? It's going to be our firewalls, whether those live in your corporate network or a data center or a remote network or up in one of our clouds that we support, like AWS or Azure, AWS. And then it's going to be our API-based CASB, which we call Aperture, right? Kind of for us, it's a 2-part solution, and we're going to kind of talk about that today and what that looks like, and then some best practice around it. And most folks don't have Aperture, right? So we're going to do some best practice. I'm also going to kind of talk about Aperture and introduce it to a lot of, because I don't think everyone knows about it. Right? So that's going to be how we're going to go today. Let's go ahead and move forward. So, we all know this, right? Our data is everywhere, and I've got to, if you've seen my slides before, I talk about this a lot, right? It's a very different model than where we were 10 or 15 years ago, right? One thing that folks sometimes don't think about is that PaaS or SaaS or IaaS type services, they're still all, right? So even though you're buying a service from someone to basically share your data, host your applications or your VMs or whatever it is, it's still a shared. And then the other thing that's kind of an overlying theme here is that there's lots of different, in this case, SaaS services. You have Box, you have ShareFile, you have Office 365, you have all these different applications, these SaaS-based applications, right? And they all have their own controls, but one of the things that Aperture plus our firewalls do is give you consistent visualization of that data and where it lives across all those different applications, right? So while they may have controls around some of the data integrity or data sharing and how that all works. They're not, you won't get that consistent view across your organization, which is where our Firewalls plus Aperture kind of comes in. All right, so again, your data is everywhere, right? It's in these SaaS applications, the ISS applications. It's still in your data centers, right? And we you know, the goal really is to understand, you know, what kind of data is out there, who is it shared with, and then I guess how do I control it? So from an organization perspective, you can kind of reduce the risk, right? And again, shared responsibility, right? So, you know, when you have a data center within your organization, the management plane, the control plane, that's all your responsibility. The data that's in there, that's all your responsibility, right? But, you know, going out to these SaaS-based services, again, it's a shared responsibility. So it's up to you as well as the provider. And so kind of when I look at this, right, I see two avenues of attack, and geared towards, these two next slides are more geared towards your typical, like I've got AWS and I'm hosting a service there, but they also apply to services like Box or Office 365 or those kinds of things, right? There's really two types of attacks or two ways that data is exfiltrated from these services, right? And one side is the management plane, right? And so that's, you know, that's the users that you have within your organization that are using the application. What kind of controls do they have? Am I using things like multi-factor authentication or single sign-on? How am I kind of controlling the management plane from attack, right? And then the other one is basically the data plane, where we're actually attacking either that server or that service, or a user maybe has just basically shared data out to the world accidentally, right? So those are kind of, from a risk perspective, those are the two different sides of the risk that when I think about these things, whether it's a PaaS service, an IaaS, or a SaaS service, they're pretty common, right, avenues of attack. So today, right, again, we're talking about our SaaS-based solution here, and that's going to include Aperture as well, which is our CASB, as well as our Firewall, right? So we're going to start off kind of with the Firewall because, you know, some folks don't know, but our Firewall actually has a lot of this control already built into it, and it's been there for a while, right? So we have this whole concept of sanctioned, tolerated, and unsanctioned applications, right? So every application within our Firewall, we can kind of tag for one of these, and we can report on it, and we can control it, right? And so from a Firewall perspective, you know, we can do things like, these are the applications that are important to your business. Let's allow those in and out, right? And so we can do that, and that's one way to manage SaaS risk. So we can, for example, say, you know, these are the sanctioned SaaS applications in our environment. They're important to us. Let's not allow the other ones, right? And let's really force our users to come through our firewalls, either through Global Protect Cloud Service or Global Protect in general, to get to these applications out on the internet. So this is definitely one way to control access, right? Also within the firewalls themselves, and I'll show you the SaaS usage report and talk a little more about that. You know, we give you visibility into what users are using what SaaS applications in your environment. And then also we can, from a granular perspective, control, for example, what file types are moving back and forth, right? And if for my sanctioned applications, maybe I allow doc in and out, but maybe for a tolerated application, I only allow downloads or uploads, right? So we very much have the ability to get very granular in how you want to control that. So again, you know, right now today, we have the ability with the firewalls that you have now as customers to run what we call our SaaS usage report, but also right from the ACC tab, you can kind of see as well. See over here where we just pick applications equal SaaS, what kind of SaaS applications are in your environment, right? So that's all there today, and that's a big part of kind of how this solution works. And so from a best practice perspective, I'll pull up a SaaS usage report here in a second. You know, this is kind of what we need to do to make sure that we're getting the most out of our SaaS usage report. So, you know, for all of our policies where we might have an allow, we want to make sure we're logging, right? So we're collecting that data. We want to make sure that user ID is configured, right? So we know what users are using, what applications. We want to make sure that, we've turned our security policies on, specifically like data filtering, right? We want to turn that on in alert mode. So just so we can get that data. When possible, we need to configure SSL decryption, right? So we can understand what's happening in there and see that. And then if possible, again, and this is, I have users that are in very different places here or customers, but if we can, we want to tag the applications that we know from a business perspective we would consider sanctioned, so we can start reporting around that, with the goal moving forward that we then start to control based on it. So for those that haven't seen it, right, we have what we call a SaaS application usage report, and this comes from our firewalls. And this really, based on the period of time we run it in, is going to kind of show you within your organization how much SaaS are you using today, right? Out of all the applications we see in your network, the total flow of data in terms of how much of it is SaaS versus other applications, the users that are using SaaS applications, the risk characteristics. This report is just a very good report to kind of understand from an organizational perspective how you're currently consuming SaaS, right? And then on a side note, for those that haven't done this before, this is a firewall here. For example, to start tagging applications to be SaaS, or so we can recognize them, we're going to go to basically the Objects tab and go to Applications. In this case, I'm going to pick like Office 365. And this one is already tagged as a sanctioned application. But for other applications, you would basically just come in and pick the tag. So in this case, we're going to add sanctions to the applications that are sanctioned, right? So we can start reporting on those. So getting kind of into the control. So once we've kind of sanctioned an application, right, we have the ability to control within that application all these different variables, right? So, can you upload? Can you download? Can you do things like document sharing? Do we want to make sure that we're checking for known malware or new malware, right? Do we want to block specific file types? This is all abilities we have within the firewall right now. So for all users that have our firewall, this is all stuff that you can do right now to kind of control your users as they're coming and going to these SaaS applications, right? And kind of to that point, we have best practices guides around a lot of this, and I'm going to show you this now. But basically, we have this new document portal, this best practices portal. For those who haven't seen it, it's really good. So we'll go over there real quick. And I'll give this slide deck and this whole presentation will be public as well. So afterwards you can grab this information. But the best practices repo is a good place to go to look for best practices and kind of how do you configure these firewalls from a best practices perspective or whatever it is that you're looking for, right? So we would go to basically the Internet Gateway Best Practices Security Policy there for that information. Another thing we have, and this is kind of for folks that are starting out, we have what we call Iron Skillet, which is a play on words, right? Because we're Pan OS. But what Iron Skillet is basically a repo. It's part of, if you go to our GitHub repo and type in Iron Skillet, you'll see it there. But what it is basically configuration templates to kind of start out from a best practice perspective, right? So, for example, if I go into templates here and I go into Pan OS, there's a full baseline template here that's a good starting point, but there's also snippets of data, right? So, for example, file blocking. There's a sample best practice file blocking policy here that you can kind of start with. So we're kind of enabling you to start from a best practices place to begin with, right? And then that's kind of what you see there as well, all right? So those are all the things that we can do from our firewall perspective, right? But so now I'm going to kind of pivot over to Aperture, which is our application-based CASB. So a CASB is a cloud access security broker, and it's a way to control data that's in these SaaS type applications, right? So there's two different types of CASBs you usually see. One is what we call an inline CASB, and the other is basically an API-driven CASB. So an inline CASB basically sits between your environment and these SaaS-based applications, where an API-driven CASB gets spun up in a cloud somewhere, and then we use the APIs of these different services to connect to them and to enforce policy and control and visualization. So from an Aperture perspective, here's really what we do with Aperture, right? We're going to basically look at all the files across all these different SaaS-based applications from a threat perspective. So we're going to leverage our Wildfire platform for that, and I'll just kind of show you what that rule looks like in a little while. So we're going to identify malware within these applications, right? And we're going to report on it and let you know. We're also going to prevent data exposure, or basically visualize that data exposure for you, right? So you can kind of see how files and data is shared across these different SaaS applications that belong to you, right? Which is also part of the data classification and discovery. And we're going to go into a demo here, and then I'll show you Aperture in a little bit and talk about some best practices as well. So again, talking about consistent security across different applications, right? So these are the applications we support from a API-driven CASB solution with our product, which we call Aperture, right? And so again, these different Box and Office, and they do have their own ways of dealing with some of these challenges and risks, but it's not a consistent approach across all the applications, right? And then one other thing that's a newer feature, and this is an interesting one, right? So the basic idea here is for basically for unmanaged devices, right, that are not coming through our firewalls, for example, right, where they don't have Globe Protect on them or not behind a corporate network, we can basically enforce through Aperture. We can force them to go through our Globe Protect gateways, right? So basically, even though they might not have the client on to begin with, they might go out to OneDrive. And they'll be forced basically to through the SAML proxy to move over to Aperture and then go through through our Globe Protect service to basically enforce policy, right? So this is a way to basically manage unmanaged devices that's a challenge for folks today. All right. So now I'm going to go into the demo, and I'm going to kind of show you around the demo, and then from a best practices perspective, we're going to talk about some of the things that are kind of important, right? So one of them is, whether it's our firewalls or whether it's the Aperture solution, we want to understand what's happening. So we want to build some reporting, and we want to look at those reports, right? Also, we want to create a list of sanctioned SaaS applications, if possible, within our organization, because with that list of sanctioned SaaS applications, then we can start to control policy and risk, right? Also, again, where possible, we want to limit public sharing of corporate information, and for specific types of information, maybe PII data or other things, we want to auto remediate, right? So if Aperture sees that data is being shared publicly and it matches an exposure level, we want to auto remediate that. And then from another best practice perspective, doing things like auto remediation or quarantine of malicious files that we see across these different SaaS products, we want to do the same thing. We want to basically auto remediate. So now I'm going to jump on over to what Aperture looks like. So this is Aperture, right? Again, this is our API-driven CASB. I will log in again. And this actually also goes right, it segues into a best practice, right? So one of the things we want to do is make sure that we're doing multi-factor authentication or some sort of single sign-on for applications like this, right? So, so they're just not using a shared password. Let's see here, chat. Yeah, I'll come back to that at the end, right? In terms of the global tech stuff and forcing on managed devices. All right. So Aperture in this case, we're going to look at, and I'll just show you real quickly. So this instance of Aperture, it's a demo instance we have, but the idea here is basically these are the services that are corporate owned, right, and that we're using and we're connected to through Aperture, right? So you can see all these different applications. So across all these different applications, we're going to enforce basically a consistent set of controls, and it's going to give us visualization to what's happening, right? So a good place to maybe start is, for example, I can go over here and I'll see that we've got some wildfire hits, right? So we can go in here and see that I've got 14 different instances where we've got basically files that are malicious that are out there across the organization, right? What's going on here? 1 second. Or for example, I'm looking at, well, what's my PII data that I have from an exposure perspective, right? And is it publicly shared? Is it external? Is it internal? I want to look at that, right? So I can go in here and kind of see across my organization, across these different SaaS applications, do I have PII data out there? Where is it? Who owns it? Have people been able to look at it, right? So there's a lot of good information here to kind of help you understand what's happening with the data that's being shared out there within your organization, right? So, for example, this is this is a doc that says it's PII data, but we're actually going to use a machine learning and some DLP-based stuff to kind of make that determination, right? You can kind of see here why we're matching those data patterns, and then we can actually also see how that file is exposed as well. And you can see that all right there, right? So we can build policy around this as well to kind of auto-remediate some of this, right? So we can see here, we've got some rules for things like PCI, DSS data within here, intellectual property, and on this specific demo, I cannot build rules, but we can go into another demo here in a little bit and kind of talk about that a little more. But the basic idea is we're defining rules, we're defining severity, we're picking the applications, those SaaS applications that we want to monitor, right? And then the specific accounts that are important to us, and then we're building like data patterns. So in this perspective, we're looking for credit card matches, right? And then we're going to decide, you know, from exposure perspective, what type of exposure is also important from a rule perspective, and then this rule also, what are we going to do from a remediation perspective, right? So we can send notifications, we can change sharing levels, we can quarantine files automatically, right? Create incidents and send emails, right? So there's a lot we can do here from a application, from basically a policy perspective to how we want to deal with this. So we also have the ability within Aperture, and this is one of those best practices, is really to think about you know, reporting, right, and kind of look at the reports and what's happening within within your different SaaS applications that you have your data in, right? So as an example, SaaS report. From an Aperture perspective, I have one over here. And like I tell customers with the SaaS-based usage report we run on the Firewall, if that's something you maybe want to do on a weekly or monthly basis, right? You want to do the same thing with the SaaS, with the Aperture report, to see kind of what's happening within the organization. What is being shared? Is it public? Is that important, right? What kind of information is that? And act on it if necessary, right? So kind of just going through the report. This is one of the pieces. So one of the places in the report that might be interesting, right? So from a collaboration perspective, who is actually out there? If you got public files shared, who's actually logging in and looking at that information, right? If they're publicly shared. And then do we have some top offender type of users that might, have a whole bunch of files exposed or that kind of thing, something to look at and maybe go talk to those folks as well.
Hey, Eric.
Yes.
Hey, you had a question earlier, and it said, how is it possible to force unmanaged devices through Global Protect Gateway on your diagram?
Yes.
I don't know if you answered that, but
yeah. So basically, what we're gonna we have basically a clientless SSL VPN, right, is part of Global Protect now, and you're gonna leverage that, right? So we're basically gonna. It's an interesting concept, but what we do is when that user with that unmanaged device is gonna hit Box, for example, they're gonna be redirected to SAML to basically log in, right? And then that's gonna. Aperture is going to be part of that as well, and it's going to push you over to basically Global Protect to log in with your SSO and use the SSL based VPN, the clientless SSL VPN client to kind of come in. I have some other diagrams. I can share those with you guys later, and then you can share it out to the group. But that's kind of how it works. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So then the other kind of thing I wanted to talk about. So from a best practices perspective, we'll go over to the settings here. It's being slow for some reason. So here's actually where, and I don't have admin rights on this box, but this is where you would actually add the different applications, and it's pretty quick, right? Basically what you're doing is you're basically building a service account on Office 365 or Box or GitHub or whatever it is, and we're going to use that to basically, we're going to point at that specific service that we want to use, and we're going to log into it, and we're going to use that to kind of get in and do what we need to do from an Aperture perspective. So from best practices, we want to make sure we have our data pattern matching stuff turned on. We want to make sure we're doing machine learning, and we have that turned on as well. And again, this one doesn't have admin rights. We'll log into another one here in a second where you can see that. We want that turned on. We want to make sure that Wildfire is enabled, right, so that we're doing that. From a general settings perspective, down at the bottom here on a box that has admin rights, there's also the ability to lock down control of basically the Aperture portal to a specific address range, right? So that's probably something you want to do as well, so that the whole internet can't basically hit this, right, for access. A really important part of kind of setting up Aperture is we want to define trusted and untrusted domains, right? Because that's kind of how we determine what's internal or public or that kind of thing, right? So there's this whole untrusted side of it, as well as the trusted side. So here we're going to put in all your domains that are trusted, right? So it's really important. This is a big part of kind of setting this up, is making sure that this is configured. And then again, from an authentication perspective, we also want to enable either single sign-on or MFA, right? So we're making sure that we're kind of protecting this portal. Again, it's the whole, different attack vectors, right? Management plane versus data plane. Right.
Hey, Eric, could you briefly describe the process of how Aperture attaches itself to an instance in the cloud, right? How does it do it? What mechanisms is it using? And how does it gather that intel and then process it on the back end? We had a question.
Sure. Yep. So let me see. This other Aperture demo I have that I can actually kind of show you this is behind my Global Protect gateway. So I'm going to turn that on here, and I want you guys to let me know how this works for you, if it's still slow or laggy. So let me just get connected here real quick. Everyone still hear me? Alex, can you still hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, so from a process perspective, this is kind of how it's going to work, right? And is it still, everything's still fast and working good? You guys can all see this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it looks good, Eric.
All right, cool. So we're basically going to go in here to the settings tab, right? And it's basically add an application. So we can pick like Google Drive as an example, right? And basically we're going to put in that email address for the administrator, and then we're going to connect. And so what's going to happen at that point is it's going to, in this case, it's going to ask for basically sign-on information, right? And we're gonna give it, right? And then what happens is basically Aperture is going to use the Google Drive API to basically do what it needs to do to talk to Google, to basically say, hey Google, right? What assets do I have within this organization? Give me. It's basically giving Google. We're gonna ask for all the logs, all that kind of stuff, right? To kind of catch up. And once we're caught up with everything that's already happened, then kind of moving forward as things change, as things are added, we're getting that information. We're looking at files as they come across, all that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So it's pretty quick. It's pretty easy, right? When I do an Aperture demo for customers, this happens pretty quickly, right? So we can spin one of these up in just a couple hours, right? And once we've got the Aperture actually running on our side, adding applications is very quick, right? Once an application is added, it does take a while, right, for all that residual data. So if that application has been running for years or months, prior to us connecting to it, it takes a while to go through all those backlog and get caught up. At which point we'll start working more in real time, right? So again, from a settings, I'll go back here. You can see here now, right? I have the ability to turn on or disable wildfire analysis, to turn on machine learning, all those kinds of things when I go into general settings, setting up specific IPs that can actually hit Aperture. Those are all kind of best practices things we want to look at. And then from a policy perspective, if I want to add a new rule, this is what rule creation looks like. And so, right, maybe we'll make this a severity 5. And from a match criteria perspective, maybe a data pattern, maybe a specific cloud app, right, that we're looking at. So we want to look at the box. And then we want to see from an exposure perspective. what's happening. So maybe we say it's a public exposure. So specifically, right? So in this case, if I'm looking at this box instance and it's publicly exposed, maybe I want to change sharing, right? So maybe I know that this box account, for example, nothing should be ever publicly exposed with this account. So using this policy, I could say, I'm going to change sharing and I'm going to remove any public links that might get added, right? So that's kind of how we approach it. And that's one of those best practices. If possible, if you know these, accounts are there, but you don't want them to be publicly shared, I could change sharing automatically. Let's see.
Hey, Eric, we had a few questions come in. Is there an implementation checklist that you can share outside of the best practice?
The implementation checklist, there is. So I'll show you what we have here real quick. Let's see. If I can get to it. We do have an administrator's guide, right? So it's going to talk about kind of getting started with Aperture. It's going to go through some of the things I talked about. It's not going to go into, set up these 5 policies or 10 policies, right? It's going to kind of tell you how to add policies and things like that. We usually, when we sell Aperture, we sell it this a implementation service as part of it, where we're going to build 5 or 10 or 15 policies with you, right? And then that's coming from our professional services side. So.
Yeah, and Wildfire is included with Aperture. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. Any other questions? So honestly, from an overview, that was the overview. That was some of the best practice. But again, from a solution perspective, it's definitely a firewalls plus CASB solution, right? It is kind of how we handle and manage this risk.
Yeah, and is there a way of exporting our logs from Aperture into, we'll say, a SIM on-prem?
Sure. Yes, yeah, we can send those logs to a SIM. Yep. Any other questions, guys?
I think we got one more that got mixed in there, and this is probably just a good topic to hit on a little bit, but does Aperture detect malware in SaaS-based files?
Yes. So absolutely, right? So let's see here. Right, so right here, these are all the different pieces of malware we've kind of picked up, right, from a SaaS perspective, and whether they're shared internally, externally, that kind of thing. So if I look at one of these, we can go in here and we can view the Wildfire Report right here, right? And so based on the policy we've configured, right, we can also say, let's quarantine this file as soon as it's malware, or we recognize that it's malware. Or we could send an email alert to say, hey, this is malware. Whatever we want to do here, there's different options into how we want to deal with this. But that's one of the key kind of differentiators that we have, is that, across basically all these different SaaS-based applications, right? Wildfire is core to what you do within your internal corporate network or up in the cloud. We're kind of extending that capability to all these SaaS services consistently, right?
Yep. And I can tell you, we've had cases during POCs where that's been the outcome, right? We throw Aperture at the cloud storage repositories, and we start finding bad stuff. Yep.
So, Eric, we had another question come through. It basically has to do with, will we be able to identify between corporate Office 365 and personal Office 365?
Yes. So this kind of goes to how we and this is the really good question, right? Because it kind of goes to the core of how this all works, right? It's so, we're only gonna so from a CASB perspective, from an Aperture perspective, we're only gonna log into those corporate accounts, right? Because that's all we really know about. Because when we go to set up Aperture, we're pointing at accounts that are owned by your corporation, right? So, and we're logging in with those service admin account type things, right? And then we're going to look at all that data. For controlling, non-corporate based Office 365, that's kind of where the firewalls will come in, right? And we're doing SSL decrypt, and we're really only allowing corporate based stuff in or out, right? We're not going to allow those users to get to non-corporate stuff.
Yeah, and would this be a good use case for 8.1 with the header insertion, where we can force, only domain?
That's a good question. I have to think about that. I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah. But I think it would be.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, lots of great questions. Really appreciate that. That's awesome. If anyone has anything else they want to toss out, please do so. Great job, Eric. Yeah, I think this was fantastic. We kind of hit on this at the beginning, but this is one of those technologies that is a great add-on on top of the next generation firewall, and for the most part, fairly minimal implementation effort and ongoing administration effort for what you get. Right, a lot of bang for your buck around Aperture, and I know you guys have seen it. We've seen it where we're not necessarily seeing it deployed in scale with a lot of the firewalls that are out there today, but definitely something that we're trying to bundle in and educate customers on as we're going forward. All right, I think that's everything we got. Unless anyone has any other questions, I think we're good to go. Looks like we might have one more here. Are you planning to expand supported SaaS app catalog? What are some of the new comings?
We are, but that's kind of roadmap. I can't, if you have specific questions, I can, we can have a roadmap conversation, right? But I don't have those that I can just share today, right? But yeah, we are planning to expand the number of applications we support. Also, and this is, I wanted to talk a little bit about Redlock, which is an acquisition we made recently, along with another one called Evident, which are also kind of in the SaaS space, but more on a control perspective and more from a, we're talking about like AWS or Azure, but this is all kind of in the future. This will be moving more together, right? And but there's not enough time today to talk about all that. So. But you're going to continue to see us evolve in this whole area, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got a couple other questions here, and just kind of good segue off of what you just hit on with Redlock and Evident.io, and what's coming in the future with those. But someone asking if Magnifier is also the same as Aperture.
No. So Magnifier is it's basically an anomaly detection tool from a traffic perspective, right? And so what Magnifier is doing is looking, so right, all of this is coming, for those of you who've heard about our application framework, a key component of our application framework is our logging service. So that's basically a logging repository for all these different new applications that we're developing or third parties are developing, all the logs that come from your firewalls, from your cloud services, whatever, it all comes into the logging service, right? And so what Magnifier is doing is looking at those logs, and it's kind of looking for user behavior from a network perspective more so. So, right, so it's, I've got a user in accounting, and every day she hits these 3 applications, and she does that between, 9 and 5 p.m., right? But, I see that that same user is now, at 12 o'clock at night sending data out to a Russian file share, right? So that's anomalous behavior. Right, and so what Magnifier does is basically keys on that anomalous behavior, right? And it does that, and so it's a good way to kind of understand, with where we have firewalls, they may sit in front of corporate environments in those places where there's a lot of east-west stuff, and we may not have a lot of visibility control there. Magnifier can really help kind of understand what's happening there and kind of alert you on that. Yeah. Yeah,
and just I I think it's a good reason, if it makes sense for anyone out there. We'd love to come in and have more of a platform-focused conversation with you because, the way we consume data is changing, the way we protect our data is changing, and the solutions that Palo's bringing to integrate with their platform have changed a lot over the past 12 to 24 months. So, anyone interested in learning more on these tools in detail and, how they all tie together and how we can overlay a solution like autofocus, which we talked about in the past webinar, to make threat hunting and finding the bad in your environment a lot easier. We would love to do that. We definitely encourage that. So, feel free to email us at info@EITS.com if anyone's interested in that. Unless we got any other questions, I think we're in pretty good shape here.
Yep. Thanks everyone for their time today. Appreciate it.
Much appreciated. And everyone, don't forget, you're going to get an email for a survey. If you do the survey, it's going to be short and simple. We will send the shirt out. And, just remember that survey is really, a lot of it's about kind of figuring out what are areas of focus that everybody wants us to concentrate on in the future. Ultimately, we want to be producing content that's meaningful for the customer base. So we definitely appreciate your feedback, appreciate your time today. Hope everyone has a fabulous weekend. Thank you very much. Eric, great job.
No, thank you. Thanks, guys. All right. Bye.